Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 674, and today is September 23rd, 2024. I'm the host of this show, Kyle Anzalone. Of course, I got a ton of news to cover on today's show as we are returning from my 2-week break. My young daughter is very healthy, so I'm a very excited new father. And of course, I really do appreciate you all being understanding that we had to take 2 weeks away so I could spend a lot of time with my family. But now we're back. And the plan for this week is I'm going to do a show. So today's show will be focused on Israel, and we're going to kind of cover all the major headlines from the past 2 weeks. Tomorrow's show, we're going to do the same thing on the war in Ukraine. On Wednesday's show, we'll cover some U.S. news and some other things going on in the world. And we're going to try to cover the major headlines from the past 2 weeks on the first half of this week's show. And then hopefully by Thursday, Friday, we're kind of back in the typical routine. We're talking about all the headlines from around the world. But I thought this was probably the way to catch up on the news that was the most sensible and reasonable way to do it, rather than trying to jump around or do like an hour and a half long show or something like that. So that is the plan for the week, everyone, and I really appreciate you all being here. Let's first mention the sponsor of the show, and that is the Expat Money Summit 2024, which is the world's largest offshore event, and it takes place entirely online from October 7th through the 11th. There's a great list of lineup of speakers for that event, including Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Dr. Ron Paul, myself, Dave DeCamp, and Hervoya Mork will all be on a panel titled World War III, Is it Fear-Mongering or a Genuine Concern? And we will be talking about that and breaking that down. So there's a couple different ways you can get a ticket to the event. You could get a complimentary ticket just by going over to the website and putting in your email address. You could also do it by following the affiliate link in the show notes page. That way you don't have to remember expatmoneysummit.com. You just find it wherever you're listening to this program. You can also get a VIP ticket to the event by using the promo code Kyle, KYLE, when you check out, and that will save you $100 on that ticket. The panel that I'm on will be a VIP panel. And with that, let's just do the rest of the round of applause. The show is found at YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee. If you want the video version, it's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, and we post the show on the blog at antiwar.com. You can find the audio version anywhere you listen to audio podcasts. And of course, follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. All right, let's get into the news. The first one we have up here is from right around the time I started my break 2 weeks ago. Israel claims its forces unintentionally shot American activists in the head. So this report published by Dave DeCamp says, the Israeli military on Tuesday said it was highly likely that one of its soldiers shot and killed an American activist in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, but claimed it was indirect and unintentional, despite it being a headshot, a claim backed by President Biden. So the young woman's name is Isanor Izzy Igi, and she was 26 years old and killed on September 6th while protesting an illegal Israeli settlement in the West Bank village of Bereita. Her family responded to the Israeli military statement, calling it wholly inadequate. The family said in a statement that they were deeply offended by the suggestion that her killing by a trained sniper was in any way unintentional. The disregard for human life in this inquiry is appalling. Later in the day, President Biden backed the Israeli claim. He told reporters, apparently it was an accident. It ricocheted off the ground and she got hit by accident. I'm working that out now, he told reporters. The statement from the family added that the shooting cannot be misconstrued as anything except a deliberate, targeted, and precise attack by the military against an unarmed civilian. The Israeli military claimed that the shot that killed her was not aimed at her, but a key instigator of a riot. However, the International Solidarity Movement, which organized the protests, said it was peaceful, and an eyewitness said the protesters posed no threat to the Israeli troops. The family reiterated a call for President Biden, Vice President Harris, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken to order an independent investigation into the killing instead of letting Israel investigate itself. The State Department said Monday that it wasn't conducting its own investigation into the incident. At a press conference in London on Tuesday, Blinken said that no one should be shot and killed for attending a protest. He added that Israeli security forces needed to make some fundamental changes to the way they operate in the West Bank, including changes to their rules of engagement. And so, you could imagine somebody reading Blinken saying that and saying, oh, well, that sounds reasonable. Somebody made a mistake here, but, they need to make some changes and corrections and then they'll fix it. But the problem with that is, of course, is this has happened time and time again. And the U.S. government always says the same thing while continuing to back Israel militarily and providing them with all the money and weapons they need to carry out these brutal ethnic cleansing campaigns, either in Gaza or the West Bank. And so we could look at, I think it was 2021, Shireen Abu Akleh, who was a Palestinian American, one of the most recognizable media figures in Gaza. She was shot in the neck by an Israeli sniper while just standing with a group of other reporters in clearly marked press vest. And the Israeli government, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, initially lied and said, oh, the Palestinians did it. And when it became clear by multiple groups, including the Israeli human rights organization Bet Telem, that there were no armed Palestinians operating in the area and there was just a single group of Israeli snipers, Israel then, claimed it was unintentional. They didn't put anybody in jail. And the U.S. says that Israel needs to re-examine the rules of engagement. And so this is just the same old playbook playing out time and time again, where Israel is able to kill major figures in the pro-Palestinian movement within Palestine, whether it's Shireen or this activist. And then when, the bill that should come due for that, right? Whenever Americans are being killed in the West Bank by the Israeli government, the U.S. government really should, at the very least, chastise the Israeli government publicly, like say, this is cruel and unnecessary treatment. The Israeli government must do things differently in the West Bank, or maybe even pull back some of the U.S. support. But we don't see any of that. We just hear they really need to look at how they're doing things and made some changes. But if those changes don't come, nothing ever changes from the U.S. side. That's the part that really needs to be re-examined here. So let's move on. And this is another one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Gaza Health Ministry releases names of 710 infants under 1 year old killed by Israeli forces. And so Dave writes, Gaza's health ministry released a 649-page document that lists the names of 34,344 Palestinians who have been killed by Israelis' assault on the Gaza Strip. The document lists 11,355 children, including 710 infants under the age of 1, as Palestinian babies that have been killed throughout the genocidal campaign. The infants are listed on the first 14 pages of the document. Last month, after 3-day-old twins were killed by Israeli forces, the health ministry said the number of newborns killed since October 7th reached 115. Newborn babies have also starved to death, and Israeli troops left 4 premature Israeli babies to die at the Al Nasser hospital last year. Gaza's health ministry office says more than 16,700 children have been killed by Israeli forces in Gaza. The list released by the health ministry includes the names of those who have been fully identified. The ministry is working to identify the remaining 7,000 bodies it has counted, and said Monday that the death toll is currently at 41,226. Out of the 34,344 people who have been identified, 60% are children, women, and elderly. The remaining 40% are men aged roughly 18 to 59. The numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry are considered an undercount since it doesn't include the Palestinians who are missing and presumed dead buried beneath the rubble, which was previously estimated at 10,000 people, although I think it's possible that that number is far higher. It is also unclear how many indirect deaths have been caused by the U.S.-backed Israeli siege. A letter written by a group of experts and published in the British medical journal The Lancet estimated the total number of deaths in Gaza, including those killed by the Israeli military and indirect causes, could reach 186,000. And they made that estimate in June, so I'm sure if that estimate came out now, it would probably top the 200,000 mark. Now, a couple other things on the death count. There's a group of U.S. surgeons, nurses, other medical professionals who wrote a letter to President Biden about 2 months ago and estimated that the death toll was actually about 94,000. And so now that would probably be up over 100,000. That letter came out 2 to 3 months ago. But I thought that was probably a pretty good estimate from what I've seen. If you talk to Palestinians, Palestinians outside of Gaza, they often estimate that the true death toll is inching near 250,000 at this point. I don't know if that's on the high end, but these are the people who are most likely to be having like conversations with people who are actually inside of Gaza. And maybe they're actually able to arrive at these numbers because they're talking and they're getting a true counting from different people within Gaza as to how many people have died, and so they actually have a better estimate. But I think this 34,000 number or 40,000 number is really low, and probably low by half at this point, if not significantly more. And as we've talked about on this show in the past, the rebuilding of Gaza is going to be a significant, a huge undertaking if it's ever going to be rebuilt for the Palestinians, which I really doubt. But, let's say the military campaign ended today and they started the rebuilding of Gaza, there's still going to be thousands, if not tens of thousands of Palestinians who ultimately succumb from what was imposed on them by the Israelis over these past 11 months, almost a full year now. Just the lingering diseases, the children who have been severely malnourished, like some of those people still aren't going to get the aid they need. It's going to take time to rebuild basically an entire society. All the hospitals, all these things are not going to be built right away. And so there's still going to be a lot of excess death. Again, and that was if everything ended right now, which doesn't look very likely. U.S. officials say there will be no end to Gaza's ceasefire deal before Biden's term ends. So senior U.S. This is from Dave DeCamp on the 19th, by the way. Senior U.S. officials have concluded that a Gaza ceasefire deal will likely not be reached before President Biden's term comes to an end on January 20th, 2025, the Wall Street Journal reported on Thursday. For months, Biden administration officials have claimed that a hostage deal between Israel and Hamas was in sight, or nearing the finish line is what the term they've been using for a couple months, while at the same time, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was consistently rejecting the idea of a permanent ceasefire. So the U.S. officials speaking to the Journal blamed the lack of a deal on Hamas, claiming the main sticking point is over the ratio of Palestinian prisoners to Israeli hostages that will be released. But it has been widely acknowledged by Israeli officials and media outlets within Israel even that Netanyahu has been sabotaging the chances of an agreement. Members of the Israeli negotiating team said last month that Netanyahu's insistence on maintaining control of the Philadelphia corridor was intended to, quote, blow up negotiations. The Israeli officials that spoke with the Journal said another reason a deal is not going to happen was the Israeli operations in Lebanon that blew up thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies, which we'll talk about next. The officials said the attack has made the chances of a major regional war much more likely. So one U.S. official said, "No deal is imminent. I'm not sure it ever gets done." The report said a number of top officials in the White House, Pentagon, and State Department don't think a deal will happen. President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris both claim they care about a huge number of civilians being slaughtered in Gaza and that they're working on a ceasefire, but their administration continues to ship weapons to Israel, and there is no sign they're even considering cutting off the flow of arms, which would force Israel to agree to a deal. A senior Israeli Air Force official recently acknowledged that without U.S. support, Israel wouldn't be able to sustain operations in Gaza for more than a few months. In the meantime, the genocidal slaughter in Gaza continues. The latest figures from Gaza's health ministry put the number of Palestinians killed by Israel since October 7th at 41,272. That figure is considered to be an undercount since it doesn't account for the Palestinians missing and presumed dead and buried beneath the rubble. So this is, really important that this is getting reported in the Wall Street Journal. And it's something that we have been talking about on this show since really the political season here in the U.S. ramped up April or May. I think it became very clear that the political dynamics in the United States made it so, and look, I think this war should end. I'm not making a case for continuing the war, but the political dynamics in the United States, both sides are trying to, the Republicans and the Democrats are trying to portray themselves as the biggest supporter of Israel and the side that's trying to support Israel more. And they're trying to portray the other side as not doing enough for Israel. And so under those conditions, right, where this is like, I don't know, maybe a kid whose parents had just gotten divorced, right? And their parents are, both trying to buy them all these gifts so the kid loves them more and everything like that. Well, if Netanyahu ends the war, then Christmas comes to an end in a sense because it takes Israel off the table as a major campaign issue. So long as this war continues to go on, he's going to get both the Republicans and the Democrats trying to be the most supportive of Israel. And politically, it's just a good position to be in. I've often said, particularly since the start of this conflict, that I think the person who understands American politics the best is the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think he saw this on the table and really understood the situation here was that the longer this war goes on, the better it's going to be for Israel in the short term, because if Biden does anything to restrict the flow of weapons to Israel, then the Trump administration is going to, or the Trump campaign is going to pledge to give even more weapons to Israel, which is going to put pressure on Harris to match what Trump is saying. And so I think it kind of works out that any kind of controversy created by Israel that at this point that creates any kind of political dynamics in the United States where support for Israel comes up for debate, that actually is almost beneficial to Israel because, again, the other side is going to take the most extreme position. So, we'll get into this with the pager attack or even this next story here. But essentially, whenever Israel does anything, you could guarantee that there's going to be a large portion, a majority of the American political base, not political, I shouldn't say it that way, of Congress and, our elected political leaders, people, within the Beltway who care about politics, who just for reacting for political reasons are always going to take the side of Israel no matter what they do. And that includes genocide and ethnic cleansing. We've had plenty of American politicians explicitly come out in favor of the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And that is something that Netanyahu is now considering. So Dave wrote this one yesterday, September 22nd at antiwar.com. Netanyahu considers ethnic cleansing plan for North Gaza. So the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is considering a plan that will result in the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from northern Gaza, CNN reported on Sunday. The report, citing the Israeli broadcaster Khan, said that during a closed-door meeting of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, Netanyahu said the plan makes a lot of sense. He added, "It's one of the plans being considered, but there are several others. We are committed to dismantling the civilian control of Hamas." The ethnic cleansing plan, known as the General's Plan, since it was drawn up by his tired Israeli retired Israeli general who released a video on YouTube where he laid out the idea. So the plan involves 4 steps: transferring the civilian population in northern Gaza to the south of the Nazarene corridor, blocking all aid and imposing a full siege of northern Gaza and pronouncing it a closed military zone, preventing deliveries to the area until it is cleansed and the remaining Hamas fighters are defeated by applying intense military pressure, and conducting a similar procedure in other areas of the Gaza Strip. So in the video, the general lays out the evacuation order for civilians would not be optional. He said, the right thing to do is to inform the approximately 300,000 residents who remain in the northern Gaza Strip, civilian residents, of the following. Not only are we suggesting that you leave the northern Gaza Strip, we are ordering you to leave the northern Gaza Strip. In a week, the entire territory of the northern Gaza Strip will become military territory, and this military territory, as far as we're concerned, no supplies will enter it. That is why 5,000 terrorists who are in this situation, they can either surrender or starve, he said. So many Palestinians in northern Gaza would likely ignore the evacuation order since there's nowhere for them to go, and Israel has repeatedly bombed so-called safe zones throughout the genocidal war. That means any returning Palestinian civilians in the north would be killed or starved to death by the Israeli military. There's also been a lot of reports of Palestinians who got the evacuation orders and attempted to comply with them being killed by Israeli soldiers, whether that was a convoy of people in northern Gaza in the early days of the war being bombed as they were walking along the road that Israel instructed them to walk along, or any of the now hundreds of stories of families who say they received an evacuation order, and when they opened the door to leave their house, the first family member who tried to leave was shot by a sniper. And these stories have been time and time again where Israel has these so-called red lines and no-go zones in different areas of Gaza, but they're not actually painted on the ground, and the Palestinians aren't informed of where they are. And so Palestinians walking around Gaza trying to comply with the Israeli orders, or maybe looking for food or water, have been repeatedly shot by the Israeli forces, snipers, having no idea that they were even somewhere that they shouldn't have been. So if completed, the ethnic cleansing campaign could pave the way for Jewish settlements. Many Israeli settlers and Knesset members have openly supported the reestablishment of settlements in the Gaza Strip. A group of 27 members of the Knesset, including 3 ministers, recently sent a letter to Netanyahu urging him to adopt the general's plan. The letter was signed by members of Netanyahu's Likud party, the Religious Zionism Party, and the Jewish Power Party, which are the power parties of Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the pagers attack first, because I think this really supports my idea that Israel sees any escalation as beneficial to them, because anything that happens, particularly between now and the election, the U.S. is only going to respond with more support for Israel. The White House is not going to take the chance of looking anti-Israel just a couple months before the election, even though I think it might play well with sections of the Democratic base. It's just the political calculations being made in the White House are, we have to look sufficiently supportive, if not more supportive, of Israel than Trump would be. And so that's how the U.S. is kind of treating the situation. And so when Israel does something like carry out a widespread terror attack in Lebanon, the U.S. isn't going to do anything to curtail support for Israel. In fact, the U.S. will, ramp up support for Israel, in the sense of, we're going to threaten Hezbollah that if they do anything too big in retaliation, we will go to war with Beirut. So this is from Dave DeCamp on September 17th at antiwar.com, U.S. insisted it was unaware of Israel's plan to blow up pagers in Lebanon. So the U.S. claimed on Tuesday that it was unaware of Israel's plans to blow up thousands of pagers inside Lebanon, an attack that killed at least 9 people and wounded thousands. The State Department spokesman, Matthew Miller, insisted the U.S. was not aware of this operation and was not involved. He said the U.S. was gathering information about the coordinated attack. Later on Tuesday, U.S. officials who are briefed on the operation confirmed to the New York Times that Israel was behind the attack. They said Israel planted the explosives and pagers that Hezbollah ordered from a company based in Taiwan. The Israeli attack came after the Israeli Security Cabinet added the return of displaced Israelis to their homes near their border with Lebanon as one of Israel's war goals. Israeli officials told Axios that the purpose of the decision was to signal that Israel was going to turn its attention from Gaza to Lebanon. The pager attack also came after the U.S. reportedly warned Israel against launching a wider war in Lebanon, but has also pledged to support Israel if the situation escalates into a full-blown war and provides intelligence support when Israel and Hezbollah traded heavy fire in August. Hezbollah is vowing that it will retaliate to the indiscriminate Israeli attack, which killed an 8-year-old girl, saying Israel will receive its fair punishment. The constant flow of U.S. military aid to Israel has supported Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, as well as its escalations throughout the region. The U.S. also defended Israel from an Iranian attack in April that was provoked by the Israeli bombing of Iran's consulate in Damascus, and has vowed to do so again if Iran responds to the assassination of Hamas's political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. And so just a little bit more on that pager attack. There was really 2 days of attack. Day 1 was the pagers and day 2 was the walkie-talkies. It seems that the walkie-talkies or some kind of handheld radios actually killed more people. There's about a dozen people killed by the pager attack, and this was, like pagers. I guess I remember them from my childhood. If you're younger than me, you might not remember them. Apparently, I spent several days in the hospital with my wife and newborn baby, and the doctors still were using pagers. And so they're just like a little black handheld device, maybe the size of a deck of cards, maybe just a little bit smaller than that. And it has just a little screen on it, and it'll give you a short little message. And so it's a way for just to basically be summoned. I was kind of surprised the doctors still use them and they didn't just like have their cell phones essentially replace the role of the pager. But yeah, even in the US, the doctors still use these pagers. And so what happened is all these pagers received a notification. So they beep, they vibrate, and people pick them up and look at the message. If you have one like on your table at home, the kid will pick it up and bring it to the dad or whatever. And so that happened in the death of an 8-year-old girl. But people wear these things on their hips, and so they went off while people were out shopping, crowded supermarkets and hospitals all over the place, and they caused a lot of injuries, not only to members of Hezbollah, and many members of Hezbollah, by the way, it is a political party. And so it's like saying that somebody who is a member of Hamas is an armed militant. That's not necessarily true. Hamas has civilian employees and a police force, and the same thing with Hezbollah. There's a lot of civilian employees. It's a political party that has a lot of sway, and maybe the most sway in Beirut. And so, to just say that, this is an attack on a militant group really isn't correct. Now, there's a lot of debate on why Israel did this and why now. And there was some analysis put out by Max Blumenthal in his interview with Judge Napolitano that I thought was really astute. And what Max thinks happened here was basically that Hezbollah found out that these pagers were explosive, but they found out at a low level. And so they were kind of working this information up the chain of command. And so it could be, notified to everyone that the pagers are explosive. And Israel was basically presented with a choice: either this is going to be uncovered and the plot is going to be foiled, or order the explosion now, and that's what Israel did. Matz believes, and I think this is probably the case, that Israel didn't plan to do this until it was either going to invade or launch a major military campaign in Lebanon. Now, Israel certainly has ticked up its strikes in Lebanon over the past week, but it hasn't been a major invasion or anything like that. So I do think Israel was planning to use this during an invasion of Lebanon, but it didn't quite. The plan got uncovered early. Now, just wanted to mention this one from Dave DeCamp on the 19th. Israel notified U.S. before blowing up pagers, but did not get details on what was planned. So before thousands of pagers blew up in Lebanon, Israel informed the U.S. that it was preparing an operation in the country, but didn't say what it was. CNN reported on Thursday, citing sources familiar with the matter. The sources said that Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant conveyed the message to Secretary of State Lloyd Austin early on Tuesday, but due to a lack of detail, the U.S. was left in the dark about what was going to transpire. Austin and Gallant spoke again later in the day after the pagers exploded, but it's unclear what was said in the conversation. The White House has insisted that it was unaware of Israel's plan to blow up the pagers, which was followed by the detonation of walkie-talkies the following day. The Biden administration has barely commented on the Israeli attack, which killed at least 2 children, saying that it needs to gather more information. And it seems that this has maybe put the U.S. in a little bit of a pickle from the Israeli side, where this is pretty clearly a terrorist attack. It killed and injured a lot of civilians, basically little bombs going off everywhere. Imagine if, say, Israel had just dropped a bunch of cluster bombs on an area of Beirut where maybe there was known to be a large presence of Hezbollah fighters or something like that, but you have just little bombs going off everywhere, hurting all these different people. This would be pretty clearly seen as a terrorist attack. And so the U.S. is trying not to condemn Israel and at the same time not fully endorse, full-throated endorse in this terrorist attack. And then on the same side, they're also threatening Lebanon and Hezbollah that basically, if something bigger comes out of this, then we are going to back Israel even more. And Hezbollah seems pretty upset with this. This one from Dave DeCamp on September 22nd. Hezbollah says it entered a new phase of fighting with Israel following Israeli escalations. So a deputy leader of Hezbollah said Sunday that the Lebanese group is in a new phase of fight with Israel following a series of Israeli escalations in Lebanon. He described the new phase as an open-ended battle of reckoning and said Hezbollah attacks on Israel wouldn't stop until there was a ceasefire in Gaza. He explained the Israeli settlers will not return to the north before the Israeli enemy accepts a ceasefire in Gaza. He made the comments at a funeral for Ibrahim Akul, a senior Hezbollah commander who was killed in an Israeli airstrike in a southern suburb of Beirut. The Lebanon Health Ministry said Sunday that the death toll in Friday's strike rose to 45, which includes 3 children and 7 women. Hezbollah confirmed 16 of its members were killed in the attack, including the commander and another senior commander. The Beirut bombing came a few days after Israel blew up pagers and beepers belonging to Hezbollah members, killing dozens, including at least 2 children, and wounding thousands. Israeli airstrikes continued to pound Lebanon on Saturday and Sunday. According to CNN, an Israeli military spokesperson said Israel launched 300 strikes against Hezbollah targets in southern and eastern Lebanon. At least 2 people were reported killed by the Israeli strikes on Sunday. So the chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces said Sunday that the strikes would continue. The price that Hezbollah is paying has increased. Our attacks will increase. We will safely return the residents to their homes, and if Hezbollah has not understood this yet, it will get another blow and another blow until the organization understands. Axios reported on Saturday that U.S. officials supported Israel's strategy of escalation. Israeli officials claim that the purpose of the escalation is to de-escalate the situation and not provoke a full-blown war, but there's no sign that Hezbollah will back down. So the Axios report reads, U.S. officials told Axios they recognize Israel's regional and rationale and agree with it, but stress this is an extremely difficult calibration and it could easily go out of control and lead to an all-out war. And so again, this is the situation, right, where Israel is doing something explicitly the U.S. said not to do a week ago, and then once they do it, they get in complete U.S. backing. Now, it may sound crazy that Israel would actually be thinking about invading and trying to take a piece of southern Lebanon, but maybe that's happening. This one from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. Israel drops leaflets ordering residents to flee southern Lebanon. This is from a week ago on September 15th. Reports out of southern Lebanon are that Israeli forces dropped leaflets over the area ordering civilians to evacuate from the area into the north of Lebanon and to stay there for the duration of the war. There appears to be some controversy surrounding the matter. However, as the IDF reported that the brigade which dropped the leaflets wasn't authorized to do so, and there was no evacuation order that exists right now for the people of southern Lebanon. Images of the leaflets were making the rounds on social media and said in Arabic that anyone who is left in the city at Kahim after 4 p.m. would be considered a terrorist and subject to Israeli attack. Israel carries out near daily attacks on southern Lebanon. So the region is an agricultural center in southern Lebanon. The Israeli military said the leaflets were dropped by drone in the area without authorization, and they are carrying out an investigation into the matter. And so I think this does add a little bit to the idea that maybe Israel really was looking at invading southern Lebanon, and just the pager thing happened a little bit before they were prepared. Now, one more story on Lebanon here from Jason Diss. Israeli diaspora minister says Lebanon isn't a state and advocates taking the south of the country. So tensions between Israel and Hezbollah are escalating substantially, with the scores of people killed in Lebanon in the past week. Israel's far-right government is now stepping up its rhetoric and talking war. So a member of Netanyahu's Likud party in the diaspora minister is the latest voicing pro-war rhetoric, declaring overnight in comments on X that Lebanon does not, in his opinion, fit the definition of a state, and this gives Israel every right to invade and seize southern Lebanon. He said that southern Lebanon is essentially under the control of a hostile Shiite population. He added that he believes neither Syria nor Iran counts as states and so don't merit the protection of their sovereign status as nations. Israel is generally not overly concerned about violations of sovereignty through its military actions, but what the minister is advocating for is overt military action against other nations in the region. And a real sign that maybe there is some discussion within the Israeli government that they are going to go to war in southern Lebanon. And again, I think Israel probably feels the election, anything it does up until the election, and will get an absolute blank check for, maybe a slightly lesser blank check for the lame duck Biden term, no matter who gets elected, that period from November till January. And then, it remains to be seen who gets elected and what their policy towards Israel will look like, and if we are able to mount any political pressure on the United States so we could force Israel to stop. All right, one last story here. Houthis launched long-range missile into central Israel. So the Israeli military said Sunday that a long-range missile fired by Yemen's Houthis struck central Israel. The missile traveled over 1,200 miles from Yemen, demonstrating a significant long-range capability from the Houthis. The Israeli military initially said the missile landed in an uninhabited area and that it exploded in the air, but it was not destroyed by the Israeli air defense system. The missile sparked a fire near the Ben Gurion International Airport. No casualties were reported in the strike, but Israeli officials said 9 people were injured as they were moving towards shelters after alarms sounded. The Houthi military spokesperson said the Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, fired a new hypersonic missile that traveled to central Israel in less than 12 minutes. So the Israeli military denied the missile was hypersonic, and that does seem to be a question to me. The only thing I will say is there may be, and it's not that I don't think the Houthis are necessarily capable of one day developing hypersonic missiles, but that is fairly advanced technology, and country has been largely blockaded for most of the past decade, and so I'm sure they have ways to get arms into the country. I'm not sure they could develop a new hypersonic missile, or maybe their definition of a hypersonic missile is not necessarily what it is usually thought of, which I think is plus Mach 5 speed is what they look for in a hypersonic missile. But the other possibility is, of course, that this is a part of either Iran's retaliation or Russia's retaliation. Iran, of course, for the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, and Russia, it would be a little bit more complex, right? Because we're talking about Russia understands that Israel is a key defense dependent on the U.S., and so by attacking Israel is in a way a response for the U.S. support for Ukraine. And maybe they feel that they could cause the U.S. to have to redirect some military assets from Eastern Europe to the Mediterranean, to the Middle East, if they can, cause Israel to be in fear of Houthi hypersonic missiles. Although, again, that seems a tiny bit more far-fetched to me. The Iran the Iran play seems like a possibility. It's also possible that this wasn't a hypersonic missile and it was just a successful missile attack by the Houthis. Either way, I think it has some pretty big implications that the Houthis are able to do this, and is probably generating a lot of concern in Tel Aviv. All right, everybody, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. More tomorrow.